Hey everybody, it's Rabbit, and today what we're going to be doing is something pretty unique. We're going to be doing a full review of a game of X-Wing. This might be the first in the series, or this might be a one-off, I haven't quite decided yet, but this should be at least an interesting experiment regardless. Hope you have fun, and enjoy the video. And what we're going to start off with today is we're just going to look at my list and why everything is here, what upgrades it has, all the good stuff. So the first two ships we're going to look at are going to be Merle Coben and Roby Tice. Now, the big notable feature about these two is just that they're 3-point RZ2 A-Wings, and that's kind of the reason why they're in the list. Both of them have Heroic and Electronic Baffle because, honestly, they only have 4 points worth of upgrades. These two ships are effectively the objective wing component of the list in that their primary role is to take board space and also interact with objectives. Now, in terms of like board space and board control, what we're talking about is our capacity to safely use parts of the map while denying the enemy the ability to also safely use parts of the map. And one of the reasons why the RZ2s are good at it is because while a normal ship will effectively increase the board control in front of it but reduce it behind it because they don't have a back arc, RZ2s can actually take the board in front of them while also controlling the board behind them. So that's one of the reasons why I really like the RZ2s, and honestly I feel like they're a pretty underrated ship right now. The pilot abilities on these two are mostly irrelevant, they don't really impact gameplay, but at the end of the day, they are 3 points. And the next part of the list, we're going to talk about the T-70 X-Wings. Now, we have 3 of them in the list. We have Zay Versio, Veneza Doza, and Jess Pava. The relevant upgrades are that Zay Versio has M9G8, Veneza Doza has barrage rockets and an R4 astromech, so she can barrage from the front or back, and she has blue Heart 2s. And then you have good old Jess Pava, who has an R1J5, which has charges and is also pretty decent at keeping her alive in certain situations, but mostly is there for the charges. And then we also have a pattern analyzer, so that while I'm doing K-turns or Talon rolls, I can get actions, which does help out a good bit. Ultimately, this is the murder wing component of the list. Their primary objective is to both deal and take damage. They can interact with objectives if they need to. Specifically, Jess Pava is actually pretty good at it because she does have passive mods from her pilot ability. Also, the entire list has heroic, except for Pava, who has her pilot ability, so everybody has some degree of insurance against like a full blank out, which is pretty good. Even though it doesn't come up all the time, it does protect you from the worst possible results, so that's pretty handy. As far as the obstacles for the list, personally my favorite obstacle is actually the debris field, because ultimately gas clouds are a little too random. Like, their most severe effect is the ion, and the ion is entirely dependent on a dice roll, otherwise you get a strain. So it's complete roulette as to whether or not you get a mostly meaningless strain or an absolutely devastating ion, and I don't really like that amount of randomness in my obstacles. Asteroids are pure damage, so to an extent you can just kind of take the damage and fly through them if you really need to. But that kind of works both ways, and it really benefits the person who has more health. So I'm not a huge fan of asteroids, although I will take them because a lot of people are just leery of going through them and eating the 1 to 2 damage, even though a lot of times you can just absorb it. The debris field's big advantage is that the most problematic effect for it is the stress. A lot of ships can kind of tank damage. Some ships can tank ion, especially if they have a big base, so they only get triple ioned on the crit. But very few ships in the game can actually tank stress. And this actually makes it one of the few obstacles that will essentially always inhibit your next turn if you go through it. So if you hit a gas cloud and you don't get the ion, you're basically fine next turn. Same thing with the asteroids. But if you hit a debris field, like, you're still kind of screwed next turn because you still have that stress, so you have to do a blue maneuver to clear it. So in that respect, the reason why I like debris fields is because they are the most punishing if you hit them, and I feel like my skills of the game are to the point where I don't really hit my own obstacles that much, so I'm mostly looking for things that are going to inhibit my opponent, not obstacles that are inherently easier for me to use. Now, if we had more interactions in terms of specific obstacles, that might influence my decision, but I don't really have anything that goes well with gas clouds. I don't really have anything that goes well with asteroids. I do have one asteroid in the list just because it's big, and obviously, like, we're going to look at the formation later, but I do like to clog the field with as many obstacles as possible, and asteroids and debris tend to be the largest, with gas clouds tending to be the smallest. And for our opponents today, I don't have the full list, but the basics of it are we have Kaz that has outmaneuver, we have Finn who has the normal Finn kit of things like Perceptive Copilot, whatever. We have BB-8 who has something that didn't really matter. We have Poe who has Ray Crew, Chewbacca, and the title and something else. And then of course we have Zay Versio, who's exactly the same as our Zay Versio. This will be piloted by Andrew. Say hi to Andrew. For anybody new to X-Wing, or anybody that just doesn't know the scenarios off the top of your head, today we're going to be doing Assault Satellite Array. In Assault Satellite Array, there are a total of 5 objectives, and you can score these objectives on turn 2 onward by having more friendly ships than enemy ships at range 0 to 1 of that objective, and you will get 1 point for doing so. Additionally, you can also destroy enemy ships. Each enemy ship destroyed will be worth a number of squad points equal to its, or number of objective points equal to its squad value. It is first to 20 for the win. And of course, once you've decided on the objective, the first thing you do is you place those objectives. The first objective has to go in the middle, and then players alternate placing them. There are quite a few restrictions on where you can place these objectives, so most of the time you will end up with the objectives in pretty similar positions to what you see on the screen, because ultimately you're always trying to make them more accessible to you and less accessible to the other player. So there's not a huge amount of variation, simply because of all the placement restrictions and the fact that you have 5 objectives that can't be within range 2 of each other. So in terms of obstacle placement, there's 3 core things you have to look at. Number 1, who needs to do an advanced maneuver and where? And advanced maneuvers are Corrigan turns, S-loops, or Talon rolls. The reason why these are the most important things to look at first is because you have very little flexibility about these maneuvers. You can't simply do a slightly faster or slower Talon roll. That's not how this maneuver works. Most ships only have 1 to 3 of these maneuvers on their entire dial, so if you don't have room, you just can't turn around. These are very inflexible. In terms of our list, we have Roby twice, Merle Coben, and Veniza Doza. They don't really care about these types of maneuvers because they have blue hard 2s and they have back arcs. So they can just keep shooting regardless. They don't ever do them. Jess Pava and Zay Versio, these are actually the 2 that we need to look at in terms of like making sure they have enough room, and we have a pretty nice area like right here that is more than suitable for it. The second question in terms of obstacles is what type of formation do you have to maintain? When we talk about formation, the big thing to look at is what is the range on all my various abilities. In terms of ability range, Veniza Doza does not have a range. Merle doesn't really have a range. Well, Merle and Roby, like they kind of have ranges, but you don't use their pilot abilities, so it doesn't matter. Zay Versio wants to be within range 3 of Doza turn 1 to lock her with M98, that's about it. And Jess Pava wants at least 1 friend nearer, usually it's Zay Versio. So our real range limitation, the only one that's kind of we have to look at is Jess Pava being at range 1 of Zay Versio. Jess Pava only really needs 1 friend. I think that's one of the biggest errors people make when looking at the pilot is you don't need infinite friends. The first reroll gives you maximum value. The second reroll, a little less, but still good. Anything beyond that's gravy, you don't need it. So that's the closest thing to a formation. Now the good news is that Jess Pava and Zay Versio are the same initiative, so we don't really have to worry about them tripping over each other. That means that our formation requirement is fairly light, and we can keep the rocks pretty tight because of it. The last factor is, do we have any large or medium bases? Because obviously these ships take up more room and thus need more room to land. Obviously we don't, our opponent does. So looking at these requirements, our ships don't need a huge amount of room to turn around. Only 2 of them need any room at all. We don't have a strict formation requirement. Only 1 ship has to be within range of 1 other ship. And they're both same initiatives, so they can leapfrog each other if they need to. And then last but not least, we don't have any large or medium bases, so we can afford to make the formation as tight or as loose as we need to. We actually have a lot of freedom in terms of how we can adjust this on the fly, which is part of the reason why I like these non-formation lists, because if you see an enemy that requires a tight formation, you can bunch them up. If you see an enemy that can really abuse a bunched up set of rocks, you can spread them out. And that's part of the reason why I like this list in particular and formation lists in general. And of course, the last bit of setup is like our full turn 0, where do we deploy our ships? So Merle pretty much always has to go first because he's I1. He's almost always the only I1 on the table. Once in a blue moon, you'll run into another one. This means Merle kind of is in this awkward position where you don't necessarily know what's going on. Like, you don't have any board state information, so you kind of have to play the odds and go for an educated guess. This is why Merle is on the left-hand side of the table and is also kind of facing to the side, because I want Merle is most likely to have an enemy across from him, so I want him to be able to fly defensively if he needs to. And by fly defensively, I mean, if you run into a situation where you have to wheel around, like your opponent tries to rush one side, the easiest way to reel is have the closest ship fly the slowest and the furthest out ship fly the fastest. On a ship like the A-Wing, the easiest way to do this is by doing hard-won turns and then combining it with something like a barrel roll. And Merle is set up to do that right now. Like, Merle can, like, essentially delay for time if he needs to in this position, or we can just do a hard 3 and rush out if we don't need to. Additionally, the reason why he's on my left is because it turns out most players are right-handed, which means most players will favor their heavy setup on the right side, which is kind of a meta thing, and it seems like it's the type of information you don't need and it's not super relevant. But at the end of the day, if you're dropping a ship onto an empty board and you have to take an educated guess, taking an educated guess with something like, okay, my opponent's probably right-handed, they're probably going to set up heavy right side, it's about as good as anything. Roby Trice is directly opposite from him. Obviously, she's another super fast ship, so we're not worried about her being out of position. We also want her on the flank to run objectives, so that's all good. You notice she's placed in a more aggressive position, because obviously, if the enemy's more likely to be Merle's side, Merle is defensive, Roby's aggressive. Roby's forward, she can just 5 straight boost. Now, if we look at the position of Jess and Zay, they have a pretty clean avenue towards the middle of the map. They're going to have to go a little fast, but I'm not actually worried about them going fast. And what I mean is, like, they're going to have to do essentially like straight 3s this turn and at least like a bank 2 next turn. Because I want to get clear enough of these obstacles that they're not inhibiting my movement on the turn 2. So that's why they're kind of set up the way they are. They're also staggered in such a way so that they'll never overlap each other no matter what maneuver they do. And the last one is Venisa Doza. Now, Venisa Doza is kind of a floater. She just goes wherever I think she's needed, but she's actually a little too far to the right. And I'll show you more what I mean when we get to the first turn. But Venisa Doza kind of wants to directly face obstacles because she can focus barrel roll essentially for free, especially with the R4 astromech and the barrage rockets. So Venisa Doza needs to be in a position where she can just fly head first at an obstacle and then decide does she need to be on the left or right side of it, which makes her hard to predict, and it makes it very easy to like manipulate your opponent's position or try to keep your opponent from guessing successfully where she's going to be. And this is the start of turn 2 map, and you can probably see what I was talking about with Venisa Doza's position. She needs to be about a full base length to the left to successfully barrel roll to the left or right of the obstacle and have more than enough to clear while doing a straight maneuver. In this position, she's kind of locked to the right, and I don't like that at all, so that's definitely a bit of a player on my side. Merle took a pot shot at Kaz, but didn't really do anything. The Roby did exchange some shots with Poe, but Roby shot at BB. Because BB was just barely within range. She did a straight 5 boost. She didn't actually shoot at Poe because I didn't want to trigger Notorious. Poe did like 1 damage to her. It's important to remember when we talk about these A-Wings and them taking damage, the A-Wings are what I would like to refer to as like a white rabbit, right? A white rabbit is a type of ship that ultimately is really annoying but is so hard to chase that they're usually not worth it. These type of ships can kind of sort of trade their health to get into better positions without really worrying about it because your opponent isn't going to just chase them down. Like, it's not worth the resources to chase down a 3-point RZ2 that goes super fast, has 3 defense die, has heroic, whatever. Because even if you take the time to chase it down and you do actually catch it, if it just rolls out of it, you're wasting so much time that it's not tenable. So ultimately, we're not really worried about Roby Trice's health. Like, as long as it's greater than 1, we're fine. Or greater than 0, we're fine. The X-Wings do not have a shot, I believe, on Poe. Oh, no. Jess actually had a shot on Poe, and she actually took off some of his shields, because he did a bank boost in. So Poe did take some minor damage, Roby took some minor damage, nothing really exceptional happened this turn. But overall, you can kind of see how the setup's building. Now, the real thing that's going to happen next turn, and my plan next turn, is to have Roby swing in and try to block Poe outside of range of the objective, and in a position where he can't really contribute to the fight all that much. And then I want to have Jess and Zay swing in, do hard 3s, not hard 3s, do bank 3s, because I want to go in and I want to try to eliminate his Venisa and his Finn before his Poe can get out from under my Roby. And of course, we also have Venisa Doza, who's going to do some long-range sniping. With barrage rockets, they don't get the range bonus against her, so she can do that pretty reliably, especially because she has the M9G8 reroll and the focus. And then, of course, Merle on the left-hand side, his objective is just going to be to touch objectives the entire game, or his objective is to touch. His objective is to interact with scenarios, and in this instance, that means being at range 1 of objectives. But he also kind of wants to fly past Kaz. Kaz and Merle are not efficient at fighting each other. Kaz is essentially a Z95 to Merle, so Merle could kind of shoot at him, but like Kaz can just run away at any time. Kaz is higher initiative. Conversely, Merle is one of the few pilots that Kaz doesn't get his pilot ability against, so Kaz really doesn't want to fight Merle, and that will come up later. But ultimately, that is my plan for next turn. And as you can see, the plan worked really well. Roby was able to do a hard 2 in and then boost forward to block Poe. In this position, Roby can lead him around by the nose indefinitely. And this is one of those things that you don't really see as much in 2.5. Was a bigger deal in like 1.0 and 2.0. But large bases have a very big footprint, which means that the front of a slow maneuver usually comes very close to the back of a fast maneuver for a large base. Which means that if a small base knows what it's doing, it can basically block every meaningful maneuver from a large base for the foreseeable future. And there's not really much a large base can do other than try to disengage and get some separation. But if you're doing that, you're also removing yourself from the fight voluntarily, and that's ultimately what leading you around by the nose is trying to accomplish. So at the end of the day, it doesn't really help that much. Jess, Zay, and Doza all took some pot shots and dropped the enemy Zay down to 2 health. Now, my Merle probably went a little too aggressive here. Like, he did like a 3-bank plus a boost, and I'm not really sure that was the right call. Like, I think I probably should have done like a 4 straight or something. But ultimately, it is what it is. Merle trades a shot with Finn. Merle does 1 damage to Finn. Finn does 2 damage to Merle. As we kind of discussed, like, these ships are white rabbits. Like, they don't really get shot that much once they've already gotten past the enemy. So the health, like much like how the health on Roby doesn't really matter in her position, the health on Merle doesn't really matter in his position either. Like, because as soon as he flies past Finn, it's not like Finn's going to turn around and shoot at him. So Merle is pretty much home free at this point. It's just that 2 damage was a little on the frustrating side, but it happens. So, like, he was probably a little too aggressive, but I don't think it was that much. I think you can afford to trade the hit points on these A-Wings for board position. Again, as long as they have more than 0 health, you're basically fine. So do you remember how I said Roby Trice could lead around Poe by the nose? Well, it turns out that is entirely the case unless I make a massive play error. So what happened was, Roby Trice pulled a hard 2, and then I was like, Roby Trice is gonna barrel roll. And then, as I place the ship for the barrel roll, and I'm busy figuring out if she wants to go front, middle, or back, my immediate thought is, why the hell am I doing this? There's absolutely no way he's going to be here. And that was completely correct. Like, I don't know why I did it in the moment. I've flown RZ2s enough, I've flown against Resistant Falcons enough. There was no way he was ever going straight. It's just not possible. Because he's definitely turning. Remember how I said when I was talking about debris clouds that most ships can't face tank stress? Turns out Resistant Falcons definitely can. They have the title, they have good passive mods and crew. They can literally just face tank stress. They don't care. So if Roby stays in her original position, she actually blocks Poe's 3 hard and keeps Poe in a position where he's not really doing that much. And you can probably see Veneza Doza's dead. The reason why Veneza Doza's dead is because Veneza Doza got shot by Kaz through a rock, got shot by Poe at range 1 because he was able to hard 3 and then boost, and then she got shot by Finn at range 1. But you also notice Finn and the enemy Zay Versio are also dead. So what happened was, Veneza Doza went first, shot the enemy Zay Versio at 2 health, range 1, she has the mod from M98 and she has the focus, so she killed her. Very average shot, that was the expected result, and it's an initiative kill, so his Zay Versio doesn't get to shoot. Which also means M98 is off of Finn before Finn shoots, which is potentially important. Then my Zay Versio and my Jess Pava try to remove both focus tokens from the enemy Finn. So Zay Versio lands her hit, forces a focus spend. Jess Pava rolls, it was like 2 paint, 2 blanks, and she rerolls because she had both Veneza Doza and Zay nearby, and rerolls into 2 more blanks. So Finn ultimately just took the 1 damage and just did a full paint shot and wiped out Veneza Doza. So it's easy to be salty about dice, and obviously salt adds a little bit of flavor. Some of it's okay, just make sure it's not your main course. But at the end of the day, the problem with that turn was not Jess Pava screwing over her dice, or getting screwed by her dice. The problem was Roby Trice's barrel roll. If Roby Trice's barrel roll doesn't happen, Poe is not in that position to shoot Doza in the first place, right? Like, Poe is just kind of stuck in no man's land, and he will be there for the remainder of the game as long as Doza continues leading him around by the nose. So, yeah, like, it's easy to blame dice, but that was definitely a player that lost me Veniza Doza, although the dice could have bailed me out and chose not to. Ultimately, Merle did have the back arc shot on Finn at range 1. Finn only had 2 health left. He also had a strain on him, so Merle was able to just pop him, but that was kind of frustrating, and it was... I'm not sure if I would say it tilted me, but like as soon as I did the barrel roll, I was thinking to myself, like, why am I doing this? One thing I will say is, even though this is a casual game, and I'm fine with takebacks in casual game, I usually don't ask for takebacks. Especially a scenario like that, where it's not an objectively wrong move, unless I know what his dial is, right? It's just a subjectively wrong move. So in that scenario, I'm not comfortable asking for a takeback, because I don't think it really... What's the best way to phrase this? I don't feel it puts the player in a proper mindset if you're trying to go to a competitive setting. You made a mistake, just roll with it, right? Like, just fly the mistake, essentially. Ultimately, at the end of the turn, we're up on objectives, we're up on ship points, because Doza was 5, Finn plus Zay was 7. We're also still kind of up on board state. We're not in the worst possible situation, because Pava's taken 2 damage, Zay's fully healthy, Merle and Roby have taken levels of damage that basically don't matter at this point. My opponent is down to only 3 ships and is behind on everything. So at this point, like, we're still in pretty good shape. We're not in like a serious danger of winning. But the game does get a little hairy later thanks to some interesting plays. So my plan for this turn, and what I assumed my opponent would be doing, is I assumed that Poe Dameron and the Fireball would essentially be crossing each other as Poe goes to orbit and the Fireball probably goes to a better position. For some reason, I always forget the Fireball has a 1 hard, and my opponent, to his credit, did recognize that he could definitely clear that 1 hard, even though I completely forgot about this maneuver. So my plan, you can't actually see Pava here because she 3 taloned and then took a red stress, or took a red focus, and then you see Zay Versio, so they're essentially right next to each other, but Pava's facing towards Poe, and like towards the bottom right hand side of the screen, and Zay's facing towards Poe. So in this setup, the plan was that Poe is running away, and Kaz is running away in the opposite direction, and both the ships are set up to pursue Kaz because he has less hit points. And both of my ships are fairly low initiative, so I only have to do a little bit of damage to get to the point where Kaz doesn't get his pilot ability against them. That was the plan, but now we are trading shots with the enemy at range 1. This is obviously not the board state I want, because this puts the 5 health Pava in a position where she can potentially die right now. The only real saving grace is that Kaz, despite having outmaneuver, is shooting through an obstacle, so Pava does still get her full 2 dice, she does still have rerolls from her droid, and she gets the focus from Pattern Analyzer. So, even though this is a bad setup, and I definitely made a mistake here, it does end up working out. Pava lives on 1 health, and does like 4 damage to Poe. Zay also does some damage to Poe, leaves him at 3 health. There's another player that I want to discuss here, and that's Zay Versio. So Zay Versio is M9G8. The person she had locked, which is Veniza Doza, is currently dead. Zay is at full health, and the enemy ships are all damaged, essentially, except for BB, but who cares. So the correct call for Zay, because she gets her pilot ability and she gets a reroll on defense anyway, and she gets heroic if she fully blanks out, is just to target lock Poe. Right? Like, she should be using M9G8 to target lock higher initiative pilots, force them to reroll a die when they attack, and then reroll all of her dice when she attacks them. Like, that should be the optimal play. And this is one of those scenarios that I'm not... What's the way to put this? I'm not used to Zay Versio outliving Veniza Doza in this list, so my decision-making tree for how to use M9G8 once I no longer need to buff a friendly is kind of incomplete right now. Most of the time people go for Zay Versio right away, and Doza's kind of an annoying target, so she gets ignored a lot, but this is the other way around. So there were kind of... Jess Pava's position is also one of those that I really the more I look at it, the more I'm like, this is not correct, right? Like, the 3 talent is too aggressive. She should actually have done essentially a 4K and ended up here. Because the 3 talent, I don't think it adds that much, and it does put her in a much riskier position. So it's like, even like trying to be as like objective as possible, if I'm looking at the board state before this is a very aggressive move when I have a controlling board state. It doesn't really make sense, right? Like I have the board, I have the field, and I have the scoreboard. There's not really any reason for me to be this aggressive. And this amount of aggression, if Pava doesn't kind of roll her way out of it so that she only goes down to 1 instead of dying, does put me in kind of a bad spot. But fortunately, Jess Pava is awesome and pulls through again. But like, I shouldn't be leaning on those dice, right? Like, that was a terrible mistake on my part. Well, not terrible, like, it's one of those, like, it worked out in the end, but like, I don't want to go with a results-based approach and just say, it worked out, therefore it was fine. It's like, it really wasn't fine, but like, it worked. But like, in retrospect, I would definitely have done the 4K. That would have been a lot safer, and Doza was really never threatened by Kaz. Like, she was at most going to get shot by Poe, so if she target locks him with M98 and forces the reroll, he's unlikely to do serious damage through her, full 7 health. So like, Doza would have been fine in the current position, just sit there, lock Poe. Pava goes out, she's a little bit more threatened, but she would still have Doza for the reroll in that position, and she would have a focus, she'd be fine. So yeah, that was a player on my part, although nowhere near as big as the player with Roby Trice. And here we have what is, spoiler alert, the last turn of the game. So essentially what's going on here is that my plan was to set up Veneza Doza to potentially shoot Poe Dameron while trying to get Jess Pava out of the way. The problem with this plan is that Doza's position to potentially shoot Poe doesn't allow her to follow Poe on the next turn. And she also moves before Roby Trice. So I'm looking at this setup and I don't actually think it was good. I think the correct maneuver instead of Zay ramming Poe was actually to just take the hard 3 over the rock, eat the damage, because that would have set her up for a better next turn. As we discussed, like, her health really isn't an issue right now in the game. And then Pava just does like a straight 4 or something and just gets the heck out of dodge and just accepts that she's going to be stressed, right? Like, she's 1 health structural damage. If the enemy wants to kill her, they can kill her. Roby obviously did, like, I think it was like a 3 bank plus a boost to try and get in position, and she does end up long bombing Poe. But the real thing here is Merle is now confronted by both Poe and Kaz. Both of these are range 2 shots, actually. Like, they're pretty close, but it turned out it was range 2 for both Merle and Poe's shots. Now, the big thing to note about this is Poe had to use his action to rotate his turret, and he also used, I believe, his pilot ability to boost. So Poe's only real dice modification right now is Ray. And then Kaz's only dice modification is a focus. Kaz doesn't get his pilot ability against Merle, as we discussed earlier. However, Merle is at 2 health. If Merle dies here, I actually think Poe, like, he definitely lives, but the question is, like, how much health does he live on? Probably like 1 or 2, but it's going to take me a bit to finish it with just Roby and Zay, especially given how out of position Zay is. So I think this position is almost a little too all or nothing. Like, Zay forced a boost out of Poe, but I don't think that in and of itself was worth Zay's, like, positioning right now. Like I said, I think the hard 3 over the rock was actually better, which is as dumb as it sounds. Because as we were talking about with rocks, if you have enough health, you can just tank the damage, and she does have enough health. But the end result is, so Merle has to survive a shot from Poe with Ray, and a shot from Kaz with a focus. Now, I'm doing the head math just to try and figure out, like, on average, does Merle survive? And, like, my head math is, like, it probably takes 1 damage, and, like, I actually did run the math later, and, yeah, it's pretty close to 1 damage. But the difference between 1 and 2 damage is not very crazy, and Merle could have easily died here. Turns out he doesn't. The long bomb from Roby Trice and the range 2 shot from Merle in a finishing paw of Poe, and that is the match. Yeah, like, I'm looking at this final position and these 2 X-Wings, and I'm like, this is wrong. Like, this was dumb, this was a mistake. Like, Jess should have just done a 4 straight. And Zay should have just done a 3 hard over the rock. Just eat the damage, take a focus, or eat the damage, take a target lock on Poe if she didn't already have one. And that would have been a much better position, because even if this doesn't work, I'm set up for next turn. Fortunately, in this position, like, it's not like I immediately lose. It's just not good. Because if Merle dies or Poe just lives on 1, it's not like Merle can't just, like, Merle can just run away if he lives on 1. If Poe lives on 1 and Merle dies, it's kind of annoying, but Roby's still pretty healthy, Zay's still pretty healthy. Like, we still have ways to close out the game, and we're still ahead on points. It's just, like, this positioning could have been a lot better. So, wrap things up like AAR style, like what went right, what went wrong. What went right was, for the most part, the initial setup, the initial battle plan. I think the obstacle deployment was actually pretty on point. I think it worked out for us. And I think what went right in the macro was our ability to consistently tick scenario points while also engaging the enemy in a meaningful way and kind of handling their best ships. Those are all pretty macro things, and those macro things did give us a pretty big cushion when we started making micro mistakes. What went wrong, which is the other part of the AR, obviously the big one is Roby Trice's barrel roll. Significant player on my part. I don't know, like, it may sound like I'm beating myself up over it, but it's one of those things where it's like there's no reason in the moment for me to have thought that was correct. So I am going to kind of beat myself up a little over it, like, because it just doesn't make any sense. Beyond that, what else went wrong? Pava rerolling 2 blanks into 2 blanks, which I think is like 2 blanks. Rerolling a blank into a blank is like a 6% chance or something, so doing that twice in one turn is impressively bad. But again, if Roby Trice doesn't barrel roll, then we don't even need that. The other thing that went wrong, Pava's 3 Talon. That definitely went wrong. Like, Pava bailed us out of it with her dice, but that could have gone pretty tragically. Yeah, and that's essentially what went wrong with that game. Doza's positioning, I think, also went wrong, but I don't think it went wrong enough. Like, it would have been nice to have the option, but I'm not sure I actually would have exercised the option instead of just barrel rolling to the right and going after Finn anyway. So, Like, I don't think that was I don't think that was as distinctly wrong. Like, I think that was more subjective. This turn I also think kind of went wrong. Like, the last turn of the game I also think kind of went wrong. Zay Versio definitely should have just 3-hearted over the rock. So, yeah, those are the things that I think went wrong. Overall thoughts, it was a good game. I had a good opponent, I had fun, and I enjoy my list. So, I mean, there's not really much more you can ask. So, just because I'm being a little critical of myself, it's because I want to refine my understanding of the list in the game. And if you were to ask me, like, what did I take away the most? What was the biggest piece of learning from this game? Weirdly enough, the biggest piece of learning was actually Zay Versio and the M9G8 decision tree. Because the rest of it I kind of already knew. It's just a matter of, like, repetitions and, like, refining the decision making on the individual maneuvers. But Zay Versio and the M9G8 was something that I hadn't really given that much thought to, but it's occurring to me now that I probably need to give more, because there's a lot of applications to that I'm not using because I'm not thinking about it, and I might be able to find more uses for it. But that's my biggest, like, thing that I'm taking away from this that I think could help me improve my play further from this specific match. And that's the end of the video. Hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to leave the list on screen in case anybody wants to mess around with it. I really enjoy it. The 2 RZ2s, I love them. They're really flexible, they're really maneuverable, and they're really annoying. They're good at chipping away at the scoreboard and your opponent's hit points while also chipping away at their patience. The X-Wings are also just really versatile. Like, they do everything you need, but they don't do anything for you. So if you're a good player, you can get a lot of use out of them. Overall, I really like the list. It has a tool set that I personally am very familiar with and very comfortable using, and I really think some of it's kind of underrated. But if you enjoyed the video, please drop a like, comment, and subscribe, because that kind of engagement metric helps me decide what kind of content I should make in the future. Have a nice day, everybody.